The person we see at the front door could be dead. That is not a theory from a social media commentator. It is not speculation from an anonymous source. It is a statement made by Dr. Ann Burgess, the psychiatric nurse researcher and FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit founder whose work directly inspired the Netflix series Mindhunter, who spent decades helping the FBI understand how violent criminals think and operate, who has been analyzing this case throughout its duration. In an exclusive preview clip from the NewsNation special airing tomorrow night on the CW, Brian Entin asked her, "So the person we see at the front door could be dead?" Her answer was one word: "That's correct." And when Entin asked if the masked man could have been killed by the boss, by the architect operating from behind the scenes, Burgess said, "Right, by the boss. Right. It was well planned. They got away with it." And they pulled a type of case that we've never seen before, as far as we know. A type of case we have never seen before. From the woman who helped build the framework through which the FBI has understood criminal behavior for the past 50 years. This is Forensic Disconnect, Day 93. And today we are going to do what this case demands on the day before the most significant national broadcast connected to it since February. We are going to examine the Burgess theory completely. What it means for Porch Guy to be dead. What it means for the investigation if the only physical witness to the execution of this crime was eliminated by the person who planned it. What it means for the forensic threads, the hair at Astrea, the blockchain, the DNA. If the person they lead to is not the architect, but a dead man who cannot speak. And we are going to talk about what the NewsNation special tomorrow means, not just as a television broadcast, as the product of 3 months of Brian Entin's sourcing, of the most consistently accurate journalist covering this case, having access to the investigators, the profilers, and the evidence picture that the public has been trying to piece together from the outside. What a produced national special on this case, with Burgess and Brucato and Casey Jordan and Entin in the same room, will put on the record for the first time. Before we go further, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Tomorrow night changes what we know about this case. Subscribe so you are here when we cover the special and everything that comes out of it. Now, let's start with Dr. Ann Burgess, because understanding who she is and what framework she is operating from when she says Porch Guy may have been eliminated is essential to understanding how seriously to take this theory. Ann Burgess is not a commentator. She is not a retired law enforcement officer offering perspective based on career experience. She is the academic architect of modern criminal profiling. In the 1970s, Burgess partnered with FBI Special Agent John Douglas, the real-life basis for the character Holden Ford in Mindhunter, to conduct the first systematic research interviews with convicted serial killers. They spoke to Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, David Berkowitz, and dozens of others. They asked specific, structured questions about criminal motivation, planning, execution, and post-offense behavior. And from those interviews, they built the conceptual framework that the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit has been using ever since to profile unknown offenders and understand violent crime. Burgess has spent her career studying organized criminal behavior, specifically the distinction between organized and disorganized offenders, between crimes that reflect planning and forethought and crimes that reflect impulse and chaos. She knows what a planned crime looks like from the inside. She knows what the behavioral signatures of a planned crime tell you about the person who planned it. When she looks at the Nancy Guthrie case, the surveillance that preceded the abduction, the specific disabling of the camera, the equipment the executor carried, the ransom notes sent to media outlets rather than the family privately, the Bitcoin wallet infrastructure, the deliberate composure on the doorbell camera footage, she is reading a behavioral record that she has been trained to read better than almost anyone alive. And what she says that record describes is a highly organized crime, well planned, a type of case we have never seen before. That level of organizational sophistication implies a specific type of perpetrator, not an impulsive actor who responded to an opportunity, not someone who decided to do this and acted on the decision quickly, someone who thought about this, who researched it, who designed an operation with moving parts and contingencies and a specific post-crime management plan, an architect. And the specific thing that an architect with sufficient organizational sophistication would plan for, the thing that the evidence of a well-planned crime implies must have been considered, is the exposure that comes from having a human executor who knows what you did and where you are. The executor is the risk. The executor is the person who was physically present at the crime scene, whose face was partially visible on the doorbell camera before he covered it, whose DNA may have been left in Nancy's home, whose behavioral patterns in the weeks and months following the crime could be observed by people around him, whose financial changes, conversational disclosures, and unexplained absences could, if noticed by the right person, produce the tip that breaks the case. In a well-planned operation designed to be permanently unresolved, a type of case we have never seen before, as Burgess said, the executor is a liability, not an asset. A person who knows too much and who can be connected to the crime in ways that eventually lead back to the architect. And for an architect with sufficient organizational sophistication and sufficient ruthlessness, the solution to that liability is the one that Burgess named: elimination. Let's think through what the elimination theory means for the investigation, because it has specific and significant implications for every forensic thread that has been building for 93 days. If the executor is dead, if the person visible on Nancy's doorbell camera at 1:47 in the morning on February 1st was killed by the architect after the crime was completed, then the genealogy process at Astrea faces a specific challenge. The hair sample being analyzed at Astrea is almost certainly from the executor. The person who was physically present in Nancy's home, the person who was at the scene and whose biological material was most likely deposited there. If the Astrea analysis produces a profile from that hair, if the SNP profiling generates a partial genetic fingerprint, and the genealogy process builds a family tree from that profile and narrows to a specific individual, that individual is the executor, who may be dead. A dead executor is still identifiable through forensic genealogy. The genealogy process does not require the identified person to be alive. It requires their genetic material to be in or connected to the public genealogy databases. A dead person's relatives are still alive. Their cousins and second cousins who took consumer DNA tests and uploaded their results to GEDmatch are still alive. The family tree can still be built. The identification can still be made, but the identification of a dead executor does not produce an arrest. It produces a person who cannot be questioned, cannot be prosecuted, and cannot, in the most operationally critical sense, be turned against the architect. In a living executor scenario, one of the FBI's most powerful tools in any multi-person criminal conspiracy is cooperation. The executor, once identified, becomes a potential cooperating witness. Offered a deal in exchange for testimony against the architect. The person who was at the scene, who knows the architect's identity, who can describe the planning, who can produce the specific evidence that connects the architect to the crime, becomes the mechanism through which the person behind the scenes is brought to justice. In an elimination scenario, that mechanism does not exist. The executor is dead. The architect has calculated that the risk of a living witness outweighed whatever other considerations might have argued for keeping the executor alive. And the investigation must reach the architect through the forensic threads, the blockchain, the linguistic analysis of the ransom notes, the motive that Nanos has protected for 93 days, without the cooperation of the person who physically executed the crime. This is what makes the elimination theory both chilling and, in a specific investigative sense, significant. If Burgess is right, the architect eliminated the executor because the architect believes that eliminating the executor is sufficient protection. That the forensic threads, the hair, the blockchain, the DNA, lead to a dead man rather than to themselves. That by removing the executor, they have removed the bridge between the physical evidence and their own identity. The question the investigation must answer is whether that calculation is correct. Whether the forensic evidence at the scene leads only to the executor, or whether it also contains traces that connect to the architect. Whether the blockchain trail from the Bitcoin wallet leads to the executor, or through the executor to the architect. Whether the 911 calls being withheld under Arizona's investigative exception contain information about the architect, rather than only about the executor. Dr. Gary Brucato, appearing alongside Burgess in the NewsNation special preview, offered an assessment that addresses this question directly. He said that if the masked individual were alive and could ever be identified, he could be a crucial key for investigators to infiltrate the center of the web surrounding the abduction. The center of the web. That phrase is Brucato's way of naming the architect, the person at the center of the operational structure, connected to everything, visible to no one. If the executor is dead, the center of the web can only be reached through the threads, the blockchain, the DNA, the motive, the 911 calls, the forensic genealogy process that CeCe Moore is waiting to begin. Each of these threads leads somewhere. The question is whether any of them leads to the center of the web rather than to the executor who was eliminated to prevent that connection from being made. Now let's go to Dr. Casey Jordan, because the criminologist and behavioral analyst who appeared alongside Burgess and Brucato in the special preview added a specific and important dimension to the profile of the crime that connects to the elimination theory. Jordan agreed with Burgess's assessment that the executor did not know Nancy personally, that he was hired, recruited, brought in from outside her world. But she added the observation that the executor was almost certainly aware of Nancy's identity through her famous daughter. That knowing Savannah Guthrie is connected to this target was likely part of the operational briefing. That the executor knew, before he arrived at that house, that this crime was connected to the mother of an NBC News anchor. That knowledge is itself significant. A person hired to execute a kidnapping who knows the target is connected to a national news figure is a person with specific and identifiable information about the operation that goes beyond the physical execution. They know the connection. They know the family. They know the size of the story. And in the weeks and months after the crime, as the story grew into the most watched missing persons investigation in modern American history, that knowledge would be increasingly difficult to contain. Increasingly difficult to not react to. Increasingly difficult to process without some behavioral change that the people around the executor would notice. The elimination theory says the architect anticipated this. That before the story became national, or in the specific window after it became national when the executor's behavioral reactions to the coverage would be at their most visible, the architect acted, eliminated the liability, and left no living witness. Burgess said it was well planned. They got away with it. The past tense, got away with it, is specific. Not they appear to have gotten away with it. Not they may have gotten away with it. Got away with it. The plan was executed. The executor was eliminated. The architect believes they are safe. The investigation will tell them whether they are. Now let's talk about what tomorrow's NewsNation special means. Because the Nancy Guthrie mystery, airing on the CW at 9 p.m. ET on May 6th, is not just a television broadcast. It is the public disclosure of 3 months of sourcing by the journalist who has had better access to this investigation than anyone outside the investigative agencies themselves. Brian Entin has been in Tucson. He has been in the neighborhood. He has spoken with investigators, with neighbors, with profilers, with sources inside the law enforcement community who have told him things they have not told anyone else publicly. He broke the story about the hair sample being transferred to the FBI. He confirmed the improved cooperation between the PCSD and the FBI. He has been the source of the most accurate and specific public reporting on this case since February. The produced special is what months of that sourcing produces when it is assembled, vetted, and broadcast. It is not a recap of what is already public. It is the disclosure of what Entin has learned, from sources who were willing to confirm specific things for a produced national broadcast that they were not willing to confirm for a daily news segment. The elimination theory that Burgess previewed is one piece of what tomorrow will contain. The three profilers discussing not just who Porch Guy is, but whether Porch Guy is still alive. The boss framework that Brucato has been developing throughout the investigation. The behavioral analysis of a crime that is, in Burgess's words, a type of case we have never seen before. What the special will tell us that we do not already know is not yet public. But the framework of what it will address is clear from the preview clips. The architecture of the crime. The relationship between the executor and the architect. The question of what happened to Porch Guy after February 1st. And, almost certainly, something from Entin's sources about the state of the investigation that has not been publicly disclosed in any daily news segment. The supervisor Steve Christie statement today adds institutional context to the day-before moment. Christie, the sole Republican on the Pima County Board of Supervisors, said the Nano's response is not worth the paper it's written on because there is no evidence that he signed any kind of statement or formality that he was submitting these responses under oath. Both the Democratic Vice Chair Hines and the Republican Supervisor Christie are now on the record saying the response was inadequate. It was not under oath. It is not worth the paper it is written on. The board meets on May 13th. And the 88 crime tip line has now received more than 3,000 tips total, with 360 in the last month alone. The public has not stopped paying attention. The tips have not stopped arriving. Somewhere in those 3,000 tips, somewhere in the intersection of what the public has observed and reported and what the FBI has been following for 93 days, the answer may already exist in the investigative record. It has not yet been released. But tomorrow, Brian Entin is going on national television, and he is bringing Ann Burgess, who thinks Porch Guy may be dead, and Gary Brucato, who says the executor could be the key to the center of the web if he were alive, and Casey Jordan, who agrees that this was a coordinated, planned, organized crime with a boss who pulled a type of case we have never seen before. Day 93. The executor may be dead. The architect is at the center of the web. The blockchain leads somewhere. The hair is at Astrea. And tomorrow, Brian Entin tells us what 3 months of sourcing has produced. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old, 5 feet tall, silver hair and blue eyes. She has been missing for 93 days. She deserves to be found. Her family deserves to know what happened. If you have any information about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI, 1-800-225-5324. Submit tips at tipsfbi.gov. Call the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 520-351-4900. The combined reward is over $1 million, completely anonymous. Hit the like button. Subscribe to Forensic Disconnect. Drop a comment. Do you think Porch Guy was eliminated? And what do you think the NewsNation special will reveal tomorrow? We read every single comment. Day 93. The person we see at the front door could be dead? We will be back tomorrow. Let's go deeper into the elimination theory. Because Burgess did not say this casually. She said it in the context of a specific framework for understanding how highly organized violent crimes are managed after execution. And that framework has a documented basis in the case history that she and Douglas built the BAU's methodology from. In the research interviews that Burgess and Douglas conducted with convicted serial killers and organized criminals in the 1970s and 1980s, one of the consistent findings about the most organized offenders was the degree to which they planned not just the crime itself, but the management of its aftermath. The most sophisticated criminal actors in their research were not people who committed crimes and hoped for the best. They were people who thought through the consequences of their actions before they acted, who identified the risks, who planned for contingencies, who made decisions about what to do after the crime based on the same kind of systematic thinking that produced the crime in the first place. Elimination of co-conspirators is a documented pattern in exactly this category of organized criminal behavior. Not in disorganized crimes, where the perpetrator acts on impulse and does not anticipate consequences. In organized crimes, in planned operations with multiple participants, with specific roles assigned to specific people, with a clear hierarchy between an architect and an executor. The elimination of the executor is the logical conclusion of the same risk management thinking that produced the plan in the first place. The BTK killer, Dennis Rader, operated for decades without being caught in part because he acted alone. There was no executor to eliminate because there was no architect-executor hierarchy. But in organized crime cases with clear boss-employee structures, in drug trafficking organizations, in contract murder conspiracies, in the kinds of multi-participant criminal enterprises that RICO statutes were designed to prosecute, the elimination of participants who have served their purpose and who represent ongoing exposure is a documented and recurring feature of how these organizations protect themselves. Burgess is applying this framework to the Nancy Guthrie case. She is saying, the organizational sophistication of this crime is consistent with an architect who thought systematically about what comes after the execution, who identified the executor as a liability, who made the decision that the investigation, which was always going to be national and intensive given who Nancy's daughter is, would eventually reach the executor through the forensic evidence at the scene, and who acted to prevent that connection from producing a live witness who could speak. The specific timing of when the executor would be eliminated, if Burgess's theory is correct, is something that the investigation would need to establish. It could have happened immediately after the crime, in the hours or days following February 1st, before the investigation had fully mobilized. It could have happened in the weeks following, as the story grew national and the pressure of coverage made the executor's behavioral reactions increasingly difficult to manage. It could have happened at any point in the 93 days since, as the investigation has moved through its phases and the executor's continued existence has remained an ongoing risk. The body would be part of the missing persons record. A person who was eliminated in connection with this crime, whose death was staged to appear as something other than what it was, or whose body has not been found, would be in the records somewhere. A death certificate, a missing persons report, an unexplained disappearance of someone connected to the investigation's geographic and social network. The FBI's 30,000 tips include any information that people have provided about suspicious deaths or disappearances in the relevant time frame and geography. And the behavioral analysis of who the executor might be. Male, approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10, prior criminal contact, professional detachment, is a profile that can be applied to unexplained deaths in the relevant time frame. If Porch Guy is dead, finding his body is a forensic priority of the highest order. Not because the executor is the ultimate target of the investigation, the architect is, but because the executor's body is a crime scene. It contains evidence of how the elimination occurred. It may contain biological material from the architect, DNA deposited during the act of elimination that, unlike the complex mixed sample at Nancy's home, may be a clean single contributor sample that directly identifies the architect. The elimination, if it occurred, was a second crime committed by the same architect, and the second crime, however carefully planned, carries its own forensic record. Now let's talk about Dr. Casey Jordan. Because in the preview clips from the NewsNation special, Jordan added a dimension to the multi-perpetrator framework that goes beyond the boss-executor hierarchy and addresses the question of why this specific crime was designed the way it was. Jordan is a criminologist and behavioral analyst whose work focuses on the intersection of criminal behavior and media, on how crimes are presented publicly, how that presentation shapes investigations, and what the specific choices made in the public communication of a crime reveal about the perpetrator's psychology and goals. When she looks at the Nancy Guthrie case, she is looking at not just what happened, but at how the crime was presented. The ransom notes went to media outlets, not to the family, not through private channels, to TMZ and to local Tucson television stations. The choice to make the ransom public, to guarantee national coverage, to guarantee that the story of a kidnapper demanding millions for the mother of an NBC anchor would become the most covered missing persons case in modern American history, is a choice that Jordan reads as intentional and revealing. She said in the preview that the executor was almost certainly aware of Nancy's identity through Savannah, that knowing the connection to a national news figure was likely part of the operational briefing. And the implication of that the crime was designed from the beginning to be national, to be public, to be the story it became, connects to Burgess's assessment that they pulled a type of case we have never seen before. What kind of case had we never seen before? A kidnapping designed not to quietly complete a financial transaction, but to generate and sustain maximum public suffering for a specific person. A kidnapping whose ransom communication strategy was specifically designed to guarantee law enforcement involvement that would make payment impossible while simultaneously keeping the story in the news indefinitely. A kidnapping with no intention of releasing the victim, because releasing the victim would end the story. The type of case we have never seen before is the case where the crime itself is not the endpoint, where the crime is the instrument, where what the architect wanted was not the $6 million in the Bitcoin wallet, which has been empty for 93 days, but the specific, documented, nationally broadcast suffering that the crime produced. The injury of not knowing, extended indefinitely, on the largest possible stage. This is what makes the elimination of the executor logical within this framework. Because once the crime has been committed, The executor's continued existence does not serve the operation. The ransom was never going to be paid. The victim was never going to be returned. The operation had accomplished what it was designed to accomplish. It had created the sustained public suffering, and the executor was now only a liability. A person who knew too much, whose continued existence was a risk to the architect's safety, and whose elimination completed the operational design. A type of case we have never seen before. An architect who planned not just the crime, but the elimination of the executor as part of the same systematic risk management that produced the crime. A case whose forensic threads lead to a person or people who may have never left a trace at the scene, because the person they hired did. Now let's go to what this means for C.C. Moore and the genealogy process specifically. Because the elimination theory has a specific implication for how the Astrea analysis and the subsequent genealogy work will unfold. Moore has described the genealogy process in terms of building family trees from partial genetic matches in public databases and narrowing through geography and age and physical description to a specific individual. The profile she is waiting for from Astrea is almost certainly the executor's profile, the genetic material left by the person who was physically present at the scene. If the executor has been eliminated, Moore's genealogy work will produce a name. A specific individual identified through the intersection of genetics and geography and age and physical description. That individual will be connected to a family tree built from public database matches, and that identification will produce a real person, or a real person who is now dead. If the identified person is dead, the genealogy process has succeeded in producing an identification, but the investigation must now use that identification to reach the architect. The dead executor's connections, their known associates, their financial relationships, their communication history, the people they interacted with in the period before February 1st, become the investigative pathway to the architect. The person who hired them, the person who briefed them, the person who eliminated them. This is the specific investigative challenge that the elimination theory creates. Not that the forensic evidence is useless, but that the forensic evidence leads to a person who cannot speak, and the investigation must use what that person left behind to reach the person behind them. The blockchain trail becomes even more critical in this scenario. The Bitcoin wallet was created and managed by the architect, not the executor. The executor's role was physical, to be at the door, to carry out the abduction, to manage the scene. The architect's role was organizational, to plan the operation, to design the ransom communication infrastructure, to create the cryptocurrency wallet, to send the notes to the media outlets. The blockchain trail leads to the architect directly, not through the executor. If the executor is dead, the blockchain is one of the most direct paths to the person who designed this crime. And the motive that Nanos has protected for 93 days describes the architect, not the executor. The executor was hired. The executor did not have a personal grievance against Savannah Guthrie or her family. The executor was, in Brucato's framing, a stooge, a goon, a hired Confederate who was not emotionally involved. The motive, the specific, personal, protected reason that Nancy Guthrie was selected as the target, belongs to the architect. And when the blockchain trail or the genealogy process or the 911 calls or the linguistic analysis of the ransom notes produces the architect's identity, the motive will be the evidence that confirms it. Tomorrow night, Brian Entin puts this on national television, with Burgess, who thinks Porch Guy is dead, with Gary Brucato, who says Porch Guy was the key to the center of the web if alive, with Casey Jordan, who says this was a type of case we have never seen before. The investigation has been running for 93 days. The special has been in production for weeks. And what 3 months of Entin sourcing, the most consistently accurate reporting on this case from anyone outside the investigative agencies, produces on a national broadcast on the CW tomorrow night at 9 p.m. ET, is the most significant public disclosure about this investigation since the FBI released the doorbell camera footage in February. Day 93. The person at the front door could be dead. The blockchain leads to the boss. And tomorrow, Brian Entin tells the country what he knows. We will be back to cover every word of it.